Hello, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. We now have some breaking news for you. US President Donald Trump has just announced that he will host the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, at the White House today for what he called a historic peace summit. In a post shared on his Truth Social account, in the early hours of Friday morning, Trump said both leaders would join him for an official peace signing ceremony, marking what could be a major diplomatic breakthrough in Azerbaijan-Armenia normalization process. He wrote, "These two nations have been at war for many years, resulting in the deaths of thousands of people. Many leaders have tried to end the war with no success until now, thanks to Trump." Trump claimed that his administration has been engaged in the behind-the-scenes diplomacy with both sides for quite some time, leading to upcoming agreement. In addition to the peace deal, Trump said the United States will also sign bilateral agreements with both countries to enhance economic cooperation. The United States will also sign bilateral agreements with both countries to pursue economic opportunities together so we can fully unlock the potential of the South Caucasus region, he stated. Expressing his pride in the upcoming agreement, Trump praised both Aliyev and Pashinyan as courageous leaders who are doing the right thing for the great people of Armenia and Azerbaijan. I'm now joined by our very own Orcan Amashov. And Orcan, what do you make of Trump's post on Truth Social?
Great to be back. Yes, this announcement was expected. We had been eagerly anticipating this announcement to be made. I didn't find an element of surprise in it. So effectively the content of this announcement was completely predictable. We were expecting something of this kind from President Donald Trump, saying that the big announcement, making big announcement, saying that the peace summit will take place. He will be hosting these two leaders, courageous leaders, taking credit for this important moment, deprecating some other leaders who failed miserably in the past, and taking credit for what is to be attained between Azerbaijan and Armenia as part of his effort to be awarded Nobel Peace Prize. I think there's no element of surprise here, but what is very interesting is that he talks about peace signing ceremony. We're talking about that peace framework peace deal to be signed tomorrow. Its importance is gargantuan, is absolutely colossal. Exact content and contours are yet to emerge. Didn't mention anything about the connectivity specifically. It wasn't supposed to, I imagine. It's an incredibly important moment, because for somebody like President Donald Trump, I think that this region, South Caucasus, is sort of alien. It's too far away. The internal problems of Azerbaijan and Armenia are not something to which he's privy. But this is an important moment. His underlings, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and other diplomats, worked very hard over the past couple of years. Circumstances were right. So effectively what's happening now, there's a factual reality which we in Azerbaijan, analysts and also officials, call post-2023 factual reality on the ground between Azerbaijan and Armenia, based on legitimacy, international legal order. And that factual reality has been created by Azerbaijan as a result of the war of 2020 and also events of September 2023. Now it needs to be formalized. This is an important milestone. This is not end of the journey. The proper peace treaty will be signed at some point later. But to be absolutely honest with you, whilst we receive all this piece of information, I wonder whether tomorrow the actual thing called the agreement on peace and establishment of interstate normalization will be signed, not just initial. Initialing will take place, probably, but actual signing, I'm not entirely sure, because that fundamental prerequisite about Armenian constitution remains. But in the grand scheme of things, you may say it's a very trivial element. We need to look at the wider picture, at the opportunities, and I think that both countries are actually doing that. But those nitty-gritty technicalities are still there, need to be fixed and sorted out in due course.
Definitely. Well, President Donald Trump definitely feels very confident about what's going to take place, and obviously making sure that the US are front and center in relation to the peace agreements. He mentioned being behind the scenes in all of this. Now, we know that the two countries have had bilateral meetings in Abu Dhabi, of the most recent, but how much of the involvement has the US actually played in this?
Very interesting question, and very central question. To what extent US has been instrumental in this whole process? If you go back to, let's say, 2020, war of 2020, back then Trump was president. And it was just the end of his term, and before the inception of Biden's term, international situation was quite interesting. Everybody was very busy with COVID-related matters, with international conflicts. Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Azerbaijan-US relations from 2020 November until, I would say, mid-2022 was not ideal at all, because US officials were using old terminology about OSCE Minsk Group, about the status of the former region and so forth. But there was one critical moment. There was a border escalation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Azerbaijan achieved a military success there along the conditional border. And then Azerbaijani presidential aide Hikmet Hajiyev and Armen Grigoryan, who happens to be Secretary General of Armenia's National Security Council, met in Washington, and they agreed on something fundamental, which was about Armenia recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, including Karabakh, and Azerbaijan back then providing some form of rights and guarantees for local Armenian population within the framework of Azerbaijan. That agreement back then was referred to as a Washington document. There was no signed document, but there was some sort of fundamental understanding. On the basis of that understanding, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan agreed in Prague on what is widely referred to as a Prague Declaration. That was a critical moment. That agreement effectively led to the sea change. That was a sea change moment, because fundamental problem between Azerbaijan and Armenia prior to October 2022 was Armenia's reluctance to recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, including Karabakh. And after that, Russia was forced to acknowledge that moment. And so we see American involvement there, because that Washington document, which was not a proper document, not a signed document, but some understanding, was adopted in the United States. That was under Biden administration. So there was some form of American involvement, which was back then, in that context, was not at all negative, but quite positive. And then in early 2023, when Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process, or rather Brussels format of this meeting, was on the verge of collapse, US interfered. There was a 4-day meeting in early May 2023, and then Armenia recognized Azerbaijan's territorial integrity with exact figure. So what I'm effectively trying to say, even under Biden administration, despite all the problems that Azerbaijan and US had, there was some element of positive US involvement. But that involvement ceased to be positive, I suppose, in mid-2023. And we remember that the suspension of Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act was not put into practice in November 2023. In fact, the US stopped all direct military aid to Azerbaijan. That was a symbolic moment, because Azerbaijan does not necessarily need any aid from any country, including the United States, but that was a moment signifying American approach to Azerbaijan. And what we now we're coming to realization that actually, again, US President will sign an executive order suspending the implementation of Section 907, which is a very important symbolic moment in the context of the relation between these two countries. And then there was one critical moment in November, prior to COP29, when there was a huge pressure on Azerbaijan to sign peace deal with Armenia without Azerbaijan's concerns being addressed. And back then, Azerbaijan refused to sign a peace deal or any form of document with Armenia, which could have been back then envisioned in the form of the document on the basic principles. Because, first of all, as long as we talk about the draft peace agreement on peace and the establishment of interstate normalization, now that document has been finalized. We can initial it. But back then, two provisions were still remaining. And I think Azerbaijani leadership back then was very conscious not to give that credit to Biden administration in view of what was back then and still perceived Armenian-centered approach pursued by Biden administration in the United States. But things have changed since, as of early 2025, the draft peace agreement has been finalized. Azerbaijani-US relations have been reset, are being reset, and the auspicious and propitious circumstances have been established for these two countries to sign this peace framework peace deal.
Brilliant. Well, Orcan, just on that, we now have a very special guest to give us that US perspective. Richard Hoagland, he's a former US ambassador, and he actually joins me on the line right now. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good evening. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great. Well, just so that you know, so President Donald Trump has just written on his Truth Social about the meeting that he will be having with Azerbaijan President Aliyev and Armenia President Pashinyan. Now, this is quite a significant time. What can you tell us about the relationship between these three countries?
It's very interesting that this is happening at this time because it was kept very quiet for a very long time. But I am very pleased to say that I think this is part of traditional American diplomacy. We work behind the scenes. We work to bring peace and prosperity to regions and to individual nations. And this has been a problem that has existed for decades and decades and decades. And to think that finally the United States is playing a role in this is very, very dramatic. The reason I say that is because we have no special interest. Our goal is not to gain something from this, it's simply to help a region become more normal in the global order, the way things are in modern history right now.
And do you think that's going to have quite an impact in regards to relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the future of the two countries?
Well, the relationship between the two countries has been evolving over the past recent years. It has been dramatic and painful in many ways. It's been painful to the ethnic Armenians who left the Nagorno-Karabakh region. It was painful before to the ethnic Azerbaijanis who were pushed out of their farms and their villages and their towns. I think the hope is to look to the future, to build a more peaceful, a more stable, and a more prosperous region based on fairness for all people, no matter who they are, but within their own international borders.
And it's something that Trump is very much blowing his own trumpet about in regards to saying that he's bringing peace to this particular part of the region. Is he correct in those statements that he's saying that this is my doing in that?
Oh my goodness, I certainly cannot speak for the President of the United States, but I do know from my 30-year diplomatic career that the White House, and that means the President and his most senior staffers, will set goals. They will suggest objectives to reach. Whether the President himself played a role in this one, I'm sorry, I don't have access to that information. I would suspect very strongly, based on the way things work in our own diplomacy, that this was done very quietly behind the scenes by very senior people working on the ground in the region and then in international fora, perhaps in Geneva, Switzerland, perhaps in Brussels. But I think all of this will become known in the next few days. We don't have that information yet.
Yes, no, definitely. And just quickly turning to Orcan, obviously hearing everything that Richard has just said, it is still a very significant and quite historical moment. What is going to be the actual, depth of what comes out of all of this in regards to signing of any particular agreement, whether or not it's an initial or an actual signed document? How historic is this moment actually going to be?
It's an absolutely pivotal moment. I think that after the war of 2020 and after September 2023, it's the most important development in Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics. Now we're going to have probably, as Ambassador mentioned, we don't know what the content of that document or rather documents are going to be, but we expect a new sort of a framework, operational framework, a legal framework within the confines of which Azerbaijan and Armenia will be pursuing this peaceful agenda. They will continue the peace process. It's not the end of the peace process. They will agree on the nitty-gritty elements. Connectivity, as far as I can see, looms incredibly, incredibly large. It looks like the Americans managed to provide this compromise solution wherein Azerbaijan does achieve what it wanted to achieve, that is unobstructed access to Nakhchivan exclave, that overland passage having this unhindered passage element, and Armenia somewhat sort of will be in a position saying that our sovereignty is intact, this organization, this third-party entity is registered in Armenia. It's all mere formality, of course, and it will have major geopolitical implications when it comes to Russia and Iran. My fundamental feeling is that whatever, irrespective of the extent of US role, which should not be underestimated because they played a critical role after early 2025, and we remember what happened in September 2022. I talked about the Washington document. Process in its fundamental essence and contours remains bilateral, but of course US as a venue is an important moment, and we should not underestimate its importance. And President Donald Trump and the current administration will get a massive credit for what is going to be attained today.
Definitely. Well, and lastly, just over to you, Richard. The US are going to come out and look quite good in regards to bringing these two countries together. Is this a massive win for the Trump administration?
That's a political question, and politicians love to have wins in their columns, don't they? So, yes, of course, it's a win for the Trump administration if, in fact, there will be a real signing to this agreement. Even if it is officially initialed, that's a big deal. We do know that so far, there's been a requirement for Armenia to make a change in its constitution to make this really work. So let's see what the news is later today, what the news will be tomorrow, and we'll understand a little bit better. If, in fact, it is a final signing of the peace agreement, it's a great historical moment.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both for joining me today. It's been great to have you both. Take care. You've been watching A News. I'm Nadia Jani.